Welcome to Feeding the Family with Dr. Kristin, where we help you navigate the challenges of feeding your family and learn about the role food plays in our health and relationships. Feeding and food relationships can be stressful, confusing, and even destructive. I'm Kristin a pediatrician and mother of 4 who's been researching and sharing what I've learned about feeding for over 10 years. In this podcast, I'll share my experience and expertise to help our kids and ourselves with everyday survival tips for real parents. This podcast is about progress, not perfection. So let's get started. Welcome back to Feeding the Family with Dr. Kristin. I'm your host, Kristin Saxena. Today's episode is kind of one I wanted to do for the end of the year. So I always get excited about the new year, but as I've gotten older, have gotten a little less interested in resolutions or setting strict rules for myself, but instead thinking of it as just a time for a fresh beginning, or maybe a time to kind of pick up some new healthy habits. For that reason, I'm super excited for our topic and our guest today. We're going to be talking about just what can give our families a kickstart to maybe make some sustainable changes to the way that we eat that are very doable, very family friendly, include food that's enjoyable and tasty to eat, but also healthy. And so our guest today is Laura Fuentes. She is the mastermind, or really the mom behind the website momables.com. She's going to share with us a lot of the resources that she has for families, as well as her story of how she got to where she is. Well, thanks for coming to the show, Laura.
I'm super excited to be here, Kristin, and get to know a little bit about how we do very similar things in our audience. And I'm just here to be a resource to you and your listeners.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I was really excited to learn about your work. So you're the mom behind momables.com, correct?
I am. Yes, I am.
So we talked previously, and that really started as a blog like 12-ish years ago. Is that about right?
Yep. I started documenting the lunches that I would make for my daughter that were not Lunchables, because she didn't like what was in a Lunchable, but she wanted food that was fun to eat. So that's really how it all started, and just sharing it out there with the world and other parents who also needed ideas.
I love it. And I actually totally relate to that, because I feel like it was around that sort of like 10 years ago or 12, you were like on the cusp. That was, I feel like, when kind of this like personal blogging, mom blogging thing was just kind of getting started. And I remember I had a blog like no one read except like 5 people I knew, but it was just kind of for fun, like when you were doing it. And I used to do the same thing. My second son was in preschool, and I used to do, what's in Sean's lunch? And so I used to do the same thing and just send little pictures of his lunch and say what was in there. And it was funny because you think you're just kind of doing it because, you're interested in food and it's fun. But I really did get like lots of friends would be like, oh, I miss what's in Sean's lunch. I used to always look in there. So I think that even in those early years, you really took it and ran with it. But I think it was a need, like it was something that parents were looking for. They're like, I used to look and get all these good ideas. Back then, there really wasn't as many resources.
Well, there was no social media. Like there was no Instagram, which is like, like a click a hashtag and get ideas really easily. There was no Pinterest. I literally had to make up things based on cookbooks at Barnes and Nobles. Like literally my kids grew up in Barnes and Nobles after school, because I couldn't buy every cookbook that I liked. So I would just like look at recipes. They would play with the trains. We would go read books when they were young. And that was like my inspiration hub, not Pinterest or Facebook or anything like that, So what I shared was really was what I was making for my family, and how, and I had the same challenges that everybody had. Like, how do I make my how can I pack a sandwich that doesn't get squished? Now we have great, amazing compartmentalized containers, but 10 years ago, we didn't have those things, So it was a challenge to make sure the food didn't get soggy, that your kid actually ate it, that was edible. And so that's really what I started sharing online, the solutions of how do I pack X, Y, and Z, and how do I make it interesting for my child to eat?
Yeah. So then talk us through, because like I said, I obviously had this blog it didn't turn into a momables.com. So talk to me about the process. Like, how did you get from where you were there, just taking pictures of, your kids' lunches, to what you've got going on now?
Yeah. So I have 3 kids. Now they are 15, 14, and 9. But at the time, my oldest 2 were they're 14 months apart, and they were the ones going into pre-K and first grade. And I think that's the time where most of us parents really experience that transition from eating food at home to having to pack it to go, right? Mm-hmm. And in addition to that lunch struggle, that's also the time where kids really start their activities after school. So that's really a period of time where we're pretty rooted at home for most of the day to really being on the go, and where evenings where the kids really are extra tired and we're also exhausted from a long day of doing chauffeuring and working. We kind of get home and have that dinner time struggle. So you really go from kind of figuring out what to cook at home to now you have to figure out not only the lunch problem, but also what to make for dinner that not just your kids will eat, but you can pull together while everyone is hungry and there's homework going on. So I found that at the earlier times, I just told you I kind of started sharing the lunches, but I'm not a trained chef. So like many people in my audience, I was also teaching myself how to cook at the time, with cookbooks and things before, now everybody sees me cook on YouTube and such. And they're like, oh, but I'm like, no, like I quit my corporate job to stay home and raise my kids. And in the process, I had to learn how to do everything that my audience and your audience experiences, right? I had to say, I burnt toast, I burned chicken, my chicken would come out too dry, right? So I really just started documenting the things that would work and what shared, because I have a business background. So I felt like I know this is really, a very basic principle. Like if a customer comes to your business and tells you something, that's just one of 1,000 or one of 100, right? Like that's just the one person that verbally said something. And I felt like if I was having these problems with food and learning how to cook for my family, surely there were other people out there who were experiencing the same thing. So I started documenting beyond lunch at that point, somewhere around 2012. I really started kind of developing recipes, kind of getting creative. And I found that I wasn't the only one. So as people, that information sharing, the problem solving of what do I pack for lunch? How do I pull dinner together in 30 minutes? It was the beginning of attracting like-minded parents like myself who just really wanted to offer good, fresh options. Healthy is a word that I use kind of loosely nowadays because healthy is different for everybody, right? But it's really about wanting to do our best as parents and knowing that at the end of the day, we made that effort, right? That our kids are fed, they're happy and safe. So my business grew organically just by sharing the solutions to the problems that I was solving. And at the same time, I knew that if I had to, I could no longer just whip something up at 6 o'clock with 2 really tired kids. So at the time, I had used a meal planning service to learn how to plan meals and learn how to cook, right? Because the only way you gain confidence in the kitchen is by doing, right? If you burn chicken once or it comes out really dry, hopefully you figure out, oh, I left it in too long. Oh, I did this, or the fire was too high. And then the next time, now you know what to look out for. So by getting help through a meal planning service, I learned the combining ingredient. I kind of figured out how it worked, and I felt that I could do it with recipes that I was creating for my family. And I felt, you know what, if these are helpful to me, just like how do I pack a sandwich without getting mushy, or how do I pack a smoothie for lunch? I'm like, surely other people out there could find it helpful to go, you know what, this week, if you just buy turkey this week, here's 4 different lunches that you can make. That's not just a turkey sandwich, for example, right? Because we want to buy the least amount of food so that doesn't go to waste at the end of the week, also for budget purposes. But we don't feel like we're eating the same thing day in and day out. So that's really how the creativity began back in 2012 of what I was learning and then applying it to what my audience really needed and wanted.
So, and then when you talk about like a meal planning service, do you mean something like a HelloFresh type delivery service?
No, that was not around back then.
Okay, I was thinking, I was like, maybe it was like the very early, or what kind of service? Because that's been a topic that we've talked about a little bit, is this idea, like you said, of getting help. And that is those kind of things, were one of the things that I mentioned that, like you said, for people can be really useful. So something in that regard, because it's like those first steps, because really to get yourself cooking, you kind of have to get comfortable. And so I always say, there's nothing wrong with looking for guides or kind of starter sets. There's a story I always tell, like, my dad never really was the cook he was like number 5 of 6 kids and a boy at the time. And then he just never was like the person that cooked meals. But this last year, my stepmom actually had lymphoma. So she was sick and she was usually the person that kind of cooked for him. And so we ended up getting them those HelloFresh meals sent. And, it was kind of like his first time really preparing meals, but he got like a lot more confident in his like cooking skills. And so I always felt like that was kind of a good like training wheel or first step. And so granted, he's, 68 years old or 69 years old. But I think at any age, that's, you could be 20 or you could be 70 years old and it doesn't matter. Like, it's sort of like those first looking for help or looking for ways to kind of get yourself started, I think is that first thing, just gain that confidence and that experience to be like, okay, I start to understand how sauteing works. Like, I understand the order that you're supposed to do things.
And what's funny that you say that is, it's interesting because today we have all of these services available of prepared meals, but 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that wasn't around. But not only that, I find that those services are great today, especially if money is not it's not an issue, because for many families, a family of 4, to do a meal delivery service where you get the food pre-prepped or food portioned it's expensive.
Yes.
And so for my family, it's not feasible to do that. And so for many families also.
Definitely.
And the only thing is that what I found is that a lot of people get it just for the adults. So they'll get 2 portions, but they're making different, quote, and I'm in quotes, kid meals. And I also find that that's a disservice to your kids, not from a nutritional perspective, although that oftentimes is that because when we do that, we're depriving them from experiencing the same enjoyment of food or participating in the same meal. So if you think about Thanksgiving, we all love Thanksgiving, whether you're a turkey person or a sides person, is because this whole meal is prepared. It's all out there. And we're all really enjoying the same foods, right? Like, maybe you don't like mashed potatoes, but someone else enjoys the mashed potatoes. But the conversation around the table is like, oh, you got to try that stuffing, or this is the best dressing, right? And I kind of always explain of what would it be like if Thanksgiving was just like, oh, we get to eat this and it's amazing because it's specially delivered for us. But you get to eat this, which I just pulled it out of the freezer. And it doesn't allow it eliminates a lot of the conversation around the food. It eliminates a lot of maybe the experience around cooking, just like you said with your dad. Like, I've tried and sometimes in those meal delivery services. And what I like about them is that for me, I can delegate sometimes, some weeks when it's really crazy. I fully delegate now to my teenagers to follow the directions. There are pictures, and so it's a good learning tool. That's why I ventured out into video and I grew a YouTube channel, because I felt like, a lot of the families that had grown, I have over 100,000 families that a lot of them have been around with me for years. So their kids were getting older like mine. And they've told me that they're using our weekly meal plans that include 2 to 3 videos to delegate those recipes to their teen kids, and their teenagers are learning that very valuable skill of cooking, right? Because
Definitely.
my YouTube videos are not like tasty / overhead, right? They're anywhere between 3 and 6 minutes because, okay, it's not a cooking show, but I do want to explain why when you pan fry something, why do you not lift the chicken from the pan until it's fully browned? It's so it doesn't stick, right? Like there are things that they're not, you could read a 1,000-page word blog post on how to pan fry chicken, or I can just explain it to you and show it to you. And now your skill just grew confidently in your ability to cook chicken, right? So for me, it's about creating these weekly meal plans is about bringing the food experience full circle for families, right? Making it more efficient to shop, right? While a lot of blogs out on the internet, they're food blogs, they'll put together a roundup of their own recipes and create a meal plan. You still have to click through, print out the recipe, create your own shopping list, right?
Yep.
And then figure out how can I prep things that save me time.
Yep.
What I appreciate about my meal plans, not like to my own horn, but I think through it as a mom who has to make food at 6 p.m. And so I've gathered those 5 recipes. I've already taken a look at how do I combine ingredients so you're shopping less, right? And how can you prep for 2 recipes while you're cooking for 1, right? What can be made ahead of time? And the shopping list is done for you. So when I use my weekly meal plans, I sit down and I just order. I use like where I live like very rural area. So for me, Walmart delivery. And I'm like, what do I add to my Walmart shopping list in 5 minutes from the done for me shopping list that I don't have? And so I can appreciate the thought of thinking through the process of meal times for families so they are more apt to making it, right? And when you are able to make food that you've put in some effort, or even if your teenagers help, right? There's a shared enjoyment and there's a shared effort. And I feel like that's something that's really missing because we're so busy, right? The last 2 years with the pandemic, we've all spent a lot more time at home, but we're still trying to connect with at some sort of level. And for me, being raised in Spain, food is how I've always connected with people. And so that's sort of like the full circle picture of the meal planning and getting help, right? While meal delivery services are great, they're not like having a plan for your food for the whole week.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, I think so many things that you said like really resonate. Obviously, like one of the huge things that we talk about a lot are this idea of shared family meals and sort of getting to the one family, one meal. That's really like the ideal situation. And I think that what I love about like a resource like you offer is you showed that is totally possible. And you come from a very real place. So you're like the recipes that you offer and the meal plans you offer are with the idea of like, this is food that we'll all eat, and it's tasty food. And like you said, it's simple in the sense it's like not overly complicated to prepare. It doesn't contain, 1,000 ingredients or ingredients that are going to be really difficult to find just in a standard grocery store.
Right.
And like you said, the other thing is it's so simple that, older kids, or it's very easy to get kids involved in the preparation as well because they're not overly complicated cooking techniques or recipes.
Or they have videos or...
Yeah.
And I think that as moms or parents, we take on this full load and responsibility to feed our family. And we forget that everyone lives under the same roof. So like last night, dinner wasn't amazing, but I got home from the studio and my husband had it made. And you know what? I think it's letting go of that perfection.
Is he not going to appreciate this episode when you...
He's going to love it. But I told him...
He's going to be like, I thought it was pretty good.
I mean, mean, everybody ate it. It was like tacos and something, or taco bar, and I turned mine into a taco salad or something,
Yeah.
Okay. So on nights, for example, where I get home really late, I can pick the simplest recipe for somebody else to make, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not going to go like, oh, it's not perfect. It's, you know what? Everybody was fed. Everybody was happy. We didn't spend $60 on a drive-through or anything like that. And by the time I got home almost at 7, I made a taco salad. Everybody was around the living room, and I'm like eating in the kitchen, standing up because we have like an open kind of, and they're like telling me about their day and stuff. And I was like, you know what? I missed the dinner interaction, but I'm still eating, and they're still talking to me and filling me in about their day.
Yes.
And because I wasn't turned around cooking, making myself food, I was facing them and kind of still eating and interacting. And for me, that meals allow us to connect that way in something that's just really important as a family, because I feel like my kids are getting older and I have less and less time with them. But when they were younger, I know the reason I created all of this is because when they were younger, making family meals was so overwhelming. And the thought of making one meal that everybody would eat was like impossible. It still is impossible. But I let go of the expectation that everyone has to enjoy it and that everyone has to eat it. Now it's like there is one meal for everyone that has an element from which everybody will eat. And if you only eat rice with shredded cheese on top because you don't like shrimp, say we have like shrimp fajitas or whatever, well, that's okay.
Yep.
I made it. It was made. Tonight might not be your favorite, but tomorrow, hey, it's an opportunity to really love dinner. Because you know what? Thursday nights, we have breakfast for dinner. And everybody usually loves that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and it's okay. Like, we're not here to please our families on every whim, right? And so that's really the evolution of the thought process of, you know what? We really need to spend more time together. How can we do it? We need to have more shared conversations beyond how was your day at school, right? Like now my conversation, I got home and my daughter's like, oh, Mom, wait till you see the taco meat. This is last night, so I can tell you this example. And I was like, what happened? And she's like, Dad didn't like finely chop it, and in the pan, you can still see the, when it's ground, it was ground turkey, but it was like, she's like, you can still see like the turkey strips from the machine. And I was like, I'm like, I know what he's going to get for Christmas in his stocking, one of those like taco meat things. But the point is like, now we're not just talking about only school or whatever. Like everybody, for me, it's been another vessel by delegating the shared responsibility of learning what they enjoy, what they don't enjoy. Like my son cannot be around cooking meat at all because he gets confused with the meat thermometer. And I'm like, oh gosh, because then it comes out dry. But you know what? You're laughing, but these are like fun things that I feel like, gosh, I get to do this because I no longer have the 100% of the responsibility on my shoulders. So to me, that's like getting help without hiring help, right? Like we're all part of a family.
Yeah. And it's help for you. And it's such a amazing experience and lesson for your children as well.
Right.
So even though they may not feel like it at the time,
it's like letting
thank
go,
you.
Right?
But exactly.
Letting go. And
exactly.
It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be done.
Yes. And I think that to me that like, I kind of love your whole story and your whole approach. Cause like you said, I think sometimes these online resources and social media, it can be very helpful in the sense that there's so much content out there that, like you said, kind of when because my kids are like 13 to 7. So when I started out, it was kind of a similar time as you, and there just wasn't as many resources. So it's good there's so much out there, but I think that on the flip side, I think some of it can be really overwhelming social media just has sort of this effect of, it's kind of been shown, it can kind of give you like lowered self-esteem because you get this idea that like, well, here's this perfect family, everything that, they're all happy and sitting around the dinner table, everybody's meal is like organic quinoa and kale and the whole family just happily eats it. And then you look and you're like, my kid's screaming at me because his, like whatever, like his carrots are touching the bread. And you're like,
the chicken has sauce or.
Exactly. And you're like, well, then you kind of start to feel like, what's wrong with me? And you kind of feel like, I can't do this. And so what I kind of really love, I mean, obviously, like still all of your recipe pictures are beautiful and everyone appreciates that. But at the same time, like you come from a place where you're like, I just taught myself. I'm not a chef. I learned this by reading books and like trying stuff out and getting help myself and trial and error, which to me is like, okay, well, I can read, I can do these things too. And then the same things, like I feel like you come from a place where it's like, I've had these, you kind of share your stories of like kids not wanting to eat the food that you made, or, I've burned the chicken. I do all of the things. I've gotten frustrated that my kids wouldn't eat the food that I had made them. All of these things.
I spent 7 years with feeding therapists trying to figure out our picky eating problem. Like this is back when, we didn't have as many resources, and I had to do this weekly meeting on Skype years ago because the therapy clinic that we hired, which is one of the best in the Ellen Sauter Institute, they're not where I live, but so I'm not going to go, well, I can't help my kid. No, I'm going to go figure with Skype. And I was like, and the internet was not what it is today, or on the phone. And that's how I did it. And now I get to share what I learned with my community, because and I share the stories. Like I used to lose it at the dinner table because mostly I was so frustrated at myself for not knowing what to do. Right? Like there's a ton of baby books, but there is no parenting book on how to not lose it, because you just can't keep your own emotions of feeling like a failure day in and day out. Because while we feel like we want to teach our kid to eat everything, it's really not the kid's fault. Right? Like, no, it's oftentimes there are our lack of like a lot of times we give up too easily because there's less of a fight on serving the foods we know they don't like. Right? Yeah. But now I just serve them, and if they don't like it, they don't like it. But I gave them the option to try it or not. Right? Yep. So I've learned a lot of things that are like, wow, I felt awful about my parenting and myself, because I was not equipped. I didn't know how. And I thought it was my kid, when all along is kids are like kids are, and they're going to do what they do. But I had the power to manage my emotions, set the boundaries, set the atmosphere around food, so it would no longer be something to debate or fight about. Right.
Totally.
But that took 7 years.
Oh yeah.
Weekly go. And I thought my kid didn't know how to swallow and all this stuff, or there was something wrong. Like he did have an allergy, like when you have to take your kid to get a colonoscopy at 4 years old, you're like, oh my gosh, like what's wrong? Like they're very scary things that a lot of families go through. And at the end of the day, we're just really learning how to navigate speaking up for someone else, right? And oftentimes we don't even speak up for ourselves, but now we have to figure out what's wrong with our child, but still work, still make dinner, still have clean clothes, still do all these things. So no wonder it's really overwhelming with so much information, which is great out there, that you can feel like you're either not doing it enough, you're not doing it right, when you're just trying to do your best. Right. Yeah. Well, and so I can see that.
We've talked about, Ellen Sauter and sort of the Sauter method, and there's so many huge takeaways. And, I think some of her big tenets are definitely like this shared family meal, not being a short order cook, making one meal and this is it. The structure to the feeding, which I think also, is something you facilitate through your meal plans. These are set, meals and snacks. And then certainly kind of like you talked about a little bit is that idea of that division of responsibility.
That's a huge one.
That was huge.
Life-changing. Yes, because it really releases a lot of the pressure on us, parents, to have to do everything. And I'm like, wow, I don't. Right? Like, from like school, I have applied that into so many areas of my life, including my business, right? Once I got it down at the dinner table, I was like, I can't just like stop there. Like I have to go from, my photos are, you're like, your food photos. Yeah, they're beautiful because I hired out somebody who lives around the corner from you,
Yeah.
To do what she does best. So
Right.
I don't have to do it. So if meal planning isn't what you enjoy to do, it's overwhelming and you just really don't know how to get started. Like, for example, like there's tons of meal plan companies out there. So I'm not saying, hey, choose the Momables classic meal plan. Like ours is $250 a week. Like I spend more on coffee.
Totally.
$10 a month for something that's done for me and saves me time that I also use.
Yeah.
I'm going to do that because I used to pay for that. So I'm not asking people to pay for something that I wouldn't use. Like I put together something that's been an evolution of the things that I learned, right? Mm-hmm. But a lot of families are like, you know what? Like this all sounds great, but I'm still eating drive-through. I'm still getting takeout. I'm still not eating, I say healthy, but like I really just don't know where to get started. And they just want to improve their whole family's health, right? Mm-hmm. Which is what I encourage, as opposed to many of us adults want to use the new year to kind of kickstart our own habits and things. And I just tell them like, I commend you and I applaud you and I'm here to support you. But think about taking your kids along this journey. Totally. It doesn't mean that they can never have goldfish again if that's what they love, right? Like it's not a hard line, right? Like nothing out there that I put out says your food can only have X ingredients. Mm-hmm. You only have to buy organic, or no, you have to do, all you're required to do is do your best, right? With the information that you have. So if now I give you the information, you can make decisions of what brands you purchase from your budget, right? And so when you need help getting started, especially as a new year approaches, I feel like taking that whole family approach makes it so much simpler because everyone's on the same boat you are.
Totally. And I'm actually really excited. I really wanted to talk about that because, well, I always, I just love like New Year's. I have this thing about kind of new beginnings. I love New Year's and the first day of school and Mondays and all of these things. I don't know why. But I just do. I think I just love this idea of a fresh start. But I would definitely say, I turned 40 this last year, and I just feel like my approach to those kind of things, though, has always changed. Like, because I think it's very common, we all know about New Year's resolutions, and people are always coming up with these rules they're going to set for themselves in the new year. And I would say like my younger self probably had these like resolutions that I was going to do. And I mean, I think the statistics show that most New Year's resolutions are like not followed through on sometime in probably the first month, right? So instead though, I still do love this. I think of it like more like the first day of school now. Like it's just a great time to think about making a fresh start. But when you have a family and you get a little older, you realize, okay, well, maybe like this kind of rigid, sort of ridiculously strict rule I was going to set for myself isn't what we're talking about. Instead, let's just talk about like something that's actually really good for me and sustainable. Like what's going to be something I can sustainably do. And that to me kind of brings us to this program that you've created, which is this Family KickStart, which is just that. So it's something where it's like, this is very doable. It's sustainable because it's easy. It's simple. It can include your whole family because like anything, any changes you try to making it in isolation is very difficult. But when you do it as a family or as a group, again, that contributes to it being something that's much more sustainable. And I think it really enhances the experience because truthfully, we all want ourselves to be healthy. We all want our children, our family to be healthy. But I find that in a lot of situations, one of those kind of gets pushed to the wayside. I think, especially if you're kind of going extreme measure, one or the other. You know, if you're like, I'm going to do this very strict, no carbs or something diet that people will go on. But most people would say, well, but I don't think that that's very healthy for my child. And I've also often asked, I'm like, well, if you don't think that that's safe and healthy for your child, think twice before you decide to take extreme measures for yourself too, because that to me can be a time for pausing. But I would love for you to kind of walk us through what your KickStart program is, because what I love about it is it's not a diet. It's not, like you said, restrictive. It's really about a resource for sustainable improvement that you can kind of use to meet yourself where you're at.
Yeah. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this, because it's been part of the program was really just part of kind of like putting together my own journey of people that asked, how do I really get my whole family to eat the same foods, right? My kids are still asking for nuggets, or I'm still getting that meal service and my kids are getting something from the freezer, or, well, we still drive through, or order food for delivery through an app 2 to 3 times a week because I get home late. And I said to them, like, and they just can't understand that I also get, like, then they don't believe that I too get home at 6:30 or 7 o'clock on production days or later, or, that have commitments. And I sat down a couple of years ago, and I explained to my husband, like, I need to really simplify, if I were to write down what it is that I do and how do I do it. And he's like, it's just go back to the basics of what it is that we do. And we create a plan. You make the same food for everyone and you offer it. And then the recipes, all the recipes are made with normal, fresh ingredients, nothing. Okay, you can cook your own beans soak them overnight and cook them all day, or you can buy them in a can, so the option is there. Again, going back to here's the recipe, you choose the ingredients and the method. And so that it makes it really easy to stick with, right?
Yes.
It's easy to prep, right? So like if I'm, this whole concept, a lot of people think that prepping food requires me to spend 5 hours on a Sunday, washing, chopping, prepping, cooking, and having everything done for the week. What I'd like to tell you is that on Sundays, I maybe spend 30 to 45 minutes figuring out what I can prep while I'm making a food on Sunday night. What can I cook at the same time? What can I chop or prep for Monday and Tuesday?
Yeah.
I cannot go all the way to Friday because the stuff that, if I'm washing or peeling potatoes or my teenagers doing that, they're not going to last till Friday. So I'm thinking, like, what can I do today and tomorrow? That's it. When I'm on tomorrow, while I already prepped the stuff yesterday, right? So now it's Monday and the slow cooker is doing its thing. I'm like, okay, since I'm hands off, while I clean up the kitchen, is there something I can prep for tomorrow and Wednesday? So I'm literally just taking it that very like therapy approach of one day at a time, but I still have a larger plan because I've already shopped for the food. I don't want it to go to waste, right? So all of those things I kind of broke down into doable meals with in like the 30-day plan, for example, you still find chicken nuggets in there.
Yeah.
They're just,
I haven't tried those yet, but I was like, oh, we're making these. These look delicious.
You still make them. Now, okay, fine. You're like, you know what? I really do not have time to do them. And if you don't have kids that are 10 and older that you can delegate breading chicken to, that can watch my YouTube video on how to make it, then okay, so then that night, maybe you are buying those pre-made as an ingredient, but they're served with a salad option, or there's fresh fruit as a side. There's all the other elements you can still make or assemble. I like the word assembly because I think of meals as an assembly line, or I think of them as assembling things that I've already semi-prepped.
Yeah.
So the 30-day plan helps you do, if you want to eliminate cereal for breakfast every day because you're like, my kid is kind of hungry, it's not as nutritious. Okay, so I pick a couple of different, the plan gives you 3 different breakfasts a week that you can cook once and eat a couple of different times. And it's paired with either yogurt or fruit. So it becomes more of a complete meal, right? And so what I like about it is that everyone, including adults, are eating the same foods, which for us, we often as adults make poor eating choices because we skip a meal.
Yep.
We're unprepared, or we quote forget to eat, but don't forget to eat because it's just kind of, we're so rushed that by the time we eat, we're just eating anything we can get our hands on. So by having that consistent plan, I felt like, you know what, I wrote it down, you know, and some people, obviously they'll do, instead of doing all 7 days, they'll do like 5 of the days and then they take off the weekend and that's enough. But in the process, they're learning the same things that I had to teach myself, which is cooking, enjoying, delegating, prepping. So in a very kind of like inconspicuous way, I'm teaching you, quote, my ways of how to pull it together. So after 30 days, if you, most people after they do the 30 days, which includes like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, because it eliminates the thinking, right?
Yes.
And you can just step into doing. And as adults, we make so many decisions every day that the first people are like, I don't know if I can go with that. I'm like, just trust the process.
Yeah. Well, and I think that was what I was going to say, is it really, like, I think the real deal for parents a lot of times is that decision fatigue. And by 6 o'clock at night, that you've made so many decisions that day, you're done. So it's no wonder that people are just like, okay, let's just get pizza, because sometimes the hardest part is like just deciding what you're going to eat. It's even harder than making the food, which sounds ridiculous, but it's true. So I love, you know, any tools that kind of help you like reduce that decision-making process that you have to make and be like, oh, we have a plan. That's already going to be super helpful. And then, like you said, what I also love about this is as you look, you know, I've kind of meal plans in and of themselves are sort of these like 30-day situations are kind of, there's a lot of them out there, but I feel like a lot of them have this sort of like, there's supposed to be some sort of like detox, or like by the end of this you'll have, you know, whatever, cured your gut or something, some sort of thing where it seems like very important that you adhere to this very strictly for, you know, X number of days. And so you'll see that out there a lot. And to me, always, like, I feel like in real life, I mean, there's lots of reasons that maybe that would be not something I'd look for, but I also think for a real family, that's not real life. You know what I mean? Like, as you look at a meal plan, you go, oh, but you know, Jimmy's birthday is in there and I don't think that's what he'd want to do. We've got this holiday, we're going on vacation, you know, or something like that, where I just don't think even those things are suitable for real life. So I love what you said, where there's no expectation, or you never comment like, make sure you adhere to this strictly, no changes. It's very much like, here you go, here's everything you could possibly need. You know, do what works for you. You know, if we're taking weekends off, or we have, you know, dinner at grandma's on Sunday nights or whatever, go enjoy. That's your family, and live it up.
That's one night you don't have to cook, right?
Exactly.
That's one night in the plan, you go, whoop, that day we're out, and you don't buy that ingredient, or you don't cook that recipe. What I found is that there is a lot of freedom when you eliminate decisions. And so, and I found also that most families in, you know, the KickStart program is really geared towards families who want to establish healthy eating habits, meaning introduce new foods to their kids in different ways, add a little bit more variety into their meals, reduce the amount of food waste that they're, you know, because it doesn't get uneaten or they get busy at the end of the week. And feel better about, like, just feel like the efforts that they're doing in the kitchen makes a difference, right? And so when you eliminate all of the decisions that you have to do on a day-to-day basis to achieve that, and it's just like, here, follow it. And they're normal, everyday recipes that people will still enjoy, the kids want to eat, right? Like, there are kid favorites there. It provides families with the opportunity to learn, discover, and actually achieve one of the goals that they have for themselves and their family, which is healthier eating, right? Like, I grew up in Spain, like I said earlier, and like this, you know, it's still to date proven that a Mediterranean diet is in fact the healthiest, quote, diet. I say diet as in the word of types of food, what you eat, not like in a restrictive way. And a lot of it comes from just using fresh ingredients. Whether yes, folks, a rotisserie chicken that's been cooked for you from the grocery store, it's still a fresh ingredient, right? It's something that you're using at its, minimally processed. Somebody else roasted for you, but it saves you time.
Yeah.
And it's 100% okay to use those shortcuts. Now, if you want to roast 2 chickens this week, that's awesome. I'm going to give you the way of how, or if you want to buy it, that's good too.
Yep.
And unless somebody in the family has to go through a strict protocol, right, to heal their gut, because I have done a lot of those. I've had the thing about it is like I've had many health issues within my family and myself in the last decade. So I have experienced what it's like to do a full elimination diet, GAPS diets, paleo diets. I've had to 18 months on keto under medical supervision for different, so I understand the challenge that comes with being the only one while still having to make normal meals for everyone else. And so that is why I'm like, gosh, it just comes down to basics of using fresh ingredients, whatever it is that you have available around you. Like I know in Nebraska, for example, your summer farmers markets and the produce that you have in the summer is amazing. In the winter, it's a hit or miss. Right. And so frozen foods are your friend. And it's totally great to roast frozen vegetables. You don't have to only roast fresh vegetables, right? Or if steaming vegetables, it's like, oh, my family doesn't like it. Try roasting them. You can still take that bag that says steam in a bag, forget about steaming it, roasting it. Yeah. Right. So again, it's back to the program or just it facilitates and like achieving what we really want, which is to enjoy meal times with our family in a consistent way. Yeah. And if you have grandma's house on Thursdays, like I do, then that's one night you don't follow or don't cook, but I still you still ate like either overnight oats for breakfast. There's pancakes for breakfast. Like you can still enjoy pancakes, even though you're eating healthier, real food meals,
Yes. And I think that's what I also love about it. I mean, I think kind of like you insinuated earlier, healthy can have different meanings to different people. And anymore, I think that's another thing we've talked about is because there's so much content and media around it, it actually becomes very confusing there's a lot of messaging about like, well, this is healthy, this isn't healthy. And a lot of it is very like black and white, like this is perfect and nobody should be eating this. But with your meal plans, I mean, I think the basic theme is sort of this reduction. The idea is to just help you reduce the amount of processed food and maybe, added sugars in your diet. Yeah. And I think you'd be hard pressed to not have, to find people that don't agree that is a healthier change that you can make. And so I love that that to me is really the idea. And I know, like you said, you grew up in Spain, but has that always been like kind of the way that you've cooked and ate was sort of lower processed food, or was that kind of like was that part of the process or your learning process where you made a decision to sort of eliminate those things?
Yeah, like I grew up literally just eating very similar foods like you saw in the KickStart program. Now, obviously, I say like those have been a little bit Americanized, meaning like the recipes that traditionally in America we like to eat now today. Yeah. But I grew up mostly with my grandmother, and yes, like we ate food made from scratch daily. That was her job. I participate, like my job was to prep the food, like wash and peel potatoes. Like everyone, if I was home or if we kids or anyone else was home, you were assigned a task. And that's kind of a lot of the mental that I forget that I try to bring back. Like, wait, the reason I know it's important, the reason I know how to do it is because someone else taught me how and made me do it, right? As a child. And then I sort of, once I moved into the United States, to the States in my teens, I really struggled with puberty, fast food. This is the 90s, and really trying all of these like Americanized foods. And so I gained a lot of weight in my teenage years. I was about 40 pounds overweight. And so I also struggled with that being a overweight teen, my mom was like, I don't understand. Like my mom would cook Mediterranean food, like our normal food that I grew up with. And she used to tell my grandmother that I don't understand, in America, it must be the water. Like my daughter is gaining weight. And I was like, it's really not the water, Mom. I'm thinking now that I look back, I'm like, it's not the water. It's the fact that, I ate school lunch, which is not the healthiest, just because my mom, even though my mom sometimes she packed lunch, I would trade it because I thought American food was so cool. And then after school, I would go to my friend's house where she had all of these processed snacks that I was really just, without knowing, I was ingesting extra calories of processed foods that I was not burning off by walking home from school, by walking to the grocery, like by living my daily lifestyle like I would in Europe. I was just not doing it here. Like I was just not an athletic child. I have a severe spine deformity. So like my back hurt all the time. So sports was like off limits.
Yeah.
Right. So I put on 40 pounds in like 2 to 3 years. My mom thought it was the water, and it was like not the water. Right. And so I know how the stigma that you carry as a teenage that's overweight, and so now I think back and I'm like, gosh, my mom she was really doing her best in the food part.
Yeah.
But she was fighting marketing, social pressure. She was fighting what my friends were serving and enjoying. And my friends were all skinny and slim. And I was like, how come they don't gain weight? And but that's hormones for you and genetics, right? And they were in sports and I wasn't. And I didn't know all of these things until now that I'm 42 and looking back and going, wow, that's what happened, right? So going back to that experience for me, it's not only painful, but it's motivating to go, it's really simple. And every day doesn't have to be perfect. That's why I say your kids, if they enjoy goldfish, like that's what are you
I think
do?
it's better too, like not to be super restrictive.
Right.
Because that causes its own problems. So I
used to sneak candy because my mom went like, oh my gosh, you cannot eat. Like she went all restrictive, right? She took me to the doctor. Something must be wrong with her. And the doctor was like, she's healthy, all this blood work later, all these things. And my mom's like, that's it. Cold turkey. We lived in California at the time. So we had sprouts and things I had never seen in my life. All of a sudden the bread was like, and what did I do? I rebelled, right?
Yeah.
Like I snuck candy in a closet. Like, right, I would eat things because they were forbidden.
Well, and the funny part is kids do that, but adults, you do it too. So that's why like these diets don't work. They don't work for kids. They don't work for adults.
Part of the lifestyle. You have to want to eat it. And my mom was like, and so she would make that one meal for both of us. And if I didn't like it, that's what we had. And so that I was like, gosh, I forgot all of those things, and so now I'm like, okay, I get it, right? Because she also worked, she was a single mom and she was just doing her best here. And so that's why also like the whole restrictive thing, I have been there in different ways and I have struggled with the weight. I've had 3 kids, put on 45 pounds, had to take them off, like I cannot, because of my spine, I cannot keep on extra weight. So I'm like not naturally skinny. Like I have to make healthy choices consistently.
Yeah.
And so I feel my audience. I feel you if you're watching us or listening, I know where you're at because I live it every day.
And that's what I love about you. So before we move on to kind of our next segment, I do want, like you said, I think this is such a fabulous resource for families, especially at this time of year. If people have kind of top of mind, like, hey, new year, I want to make some changes, but not a diet. I wouldn't think of it as a resolution. We're just talking about a tool to facilitate you with some positive, sustainable, doable changes that you can make for your family. So what's the best way for families, for parents, listeners to kind of get a hold of your materials and really kind of get to know what it's about and get started with this program?
Yeah, if you go to momables.com and you'll click on the Family KickStart program or meal plans, and then check out all the meal plans. What we were just specifically talking about was the Family KickStart program. And if you Google it, we're the only family-centric program.
Awesome.
So it is, and again, it's not about restricting, it's about making consistent, healthier eating choices.
I love it. And I would also encourage them. You have another website that's laurafuentes.com.
Right, my name.
Yeah, which has a great blog. I mean, just other reading material, I think really useful for parents. Again, very relatable, and is a lot about, taking care of yourself first and really helping that to be the best thing for your family. So we'll include all of those links with our show notes, but totally encourage everybody to check that stuff out because it's super useful. But I will move on to our next section. So our next section is Ask Me Anything. So I have a couple listener questions. The first one is from Lisa. She says, I'm a recently divorced mom of 2 young boys. We had a lot of changes in our life this last year, but I'm committed to making 2022 a great year for me and the boys. Part of that is making sure we're eating more meals at home, eating healthier, and getting a better hold on my finances. I've been looking at my budget, however, and feel I already spend a lot of money at the grocery store. I know it's possible to eat well on a budget, but I don't have a lot of time to shop around and find the best deals. Do you have any advice for improving our eating habits, but also keeping a tight budget?
Yes, Lisa, I feel you. Back in the day, I used to go to the grocery store with my cash envelope when we were in a very, very tight budget. So I had a certain amount of money allocated to my family. And I will tell you that, kind of like what we just spoke about, the first thing to do is make a plan for the week. You know what your week looks like better than anyone. So if Tuesday, Thursdays are the days where you get home really late because you have activities or you're busy, I would make those the nights that you get home the latest, you have the least amount of time to cook or spend in meal making. Those should be the nights where your meals are morely like assembly, whether you're using up leftovers or maybe it's a breakfast for dinner night, or it's a slow cooker meal. Those 3 like themed dinners really cover the budget friendly, the less time, and the still enjoying a fresh meal made at home. So what I would think about is takes 10 minutes on a weekend morning with a cup of coffee or tea if you drink that. But basically sit down and look at your week ahead and go, what would be the night that I would be most tempted to drive through something or just not make a healthy choice? So what can I make that's quick, nutritious, and that my family will eat? And so if you're, instead of meal planning, like many of us that just kind of plan through the whole week, if you don't have a lot of help and you don't have a lot of time and finances are limited, think about it that way. What will help you with a plan for your food make better choices throughout the week? So I would do that for easier nights. And then the rest is about, reusing ingredients that are not as expensive. So maybe 2 nights a week you have rice. One night could be like fried rice with, some type of protein in there. So that's instead of takeout night, you make takeout at home with, fried rice and some fruit or salad and protein. And then another night that rice could be the first night, the rice would be the side to your meal. And then because you cooked extra, now you can reuse it onto a fried rice night. Does it make sense? So
totally.
Really, it's just about 10 minutes and to sit down and plan based on your time, and then finding recipes that are budget friendly. And if you don't have a lot of, I only, like I mentioned earlier, I shop at Walmart because that's where I live. It's outside of a city, and I would have to drive to 3 places. And if it's not available there, then I'll substitute something. You know what I mean? So I keep it really simple.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with you. I think that probably the biggest takeaway from that is that key component of the planning, because I think a lot of the excess money we spend on groceries ends up because we buy more than we actually need, and we end up wasting a lot of it.
Right.
And I think we've all been there. And if you kind of go without a plan, it seems like sometimes you're at the grocery store and you have this kind of grandiose plan of how like everyone's going to eat all these fruits and vegetables this week. And and you kind of overbuy sometimes. And if you didn't have a plan for using it in a specific meal, sometimes your best intentions and like those, little radishes, you find them later kind of in a soupy mess at the bottom of the crisper drawer, right? Because you're like, oh, well, I didn't have an actual plan for getting these into anybody's mouths. I think, like you said, that key component is probably the planning. And then just keeping things simple. And as you get more into a routine, then you start to know, well, I can add, if you're trying to look for adding, more fruits and vegetables or things like that, then I would say just building on what you've already done and saying like, I can add, frozen vegetables. I can add things like that aren't 100%. A huge cost, aren't a risk for, food waste. And just be a little more strategic like that. So I totally agree. And you have some budget-friendly recipes as well on your website, correct? Like specifically geared towards people that are really looking for.
Yes. And even our classic meal plan, we have 2 meatless dinners a week. So one is very fun and simple. Like think of it as like breakfast night or something that you can easily delegate. And then we also have, one fully meatless recipe for sure. Not because it's a vegetarian plan. It's just because it costs less to feed a family. And again, looking back to my Mediterranean growing up, like we didn't have meat with every meal all the time. And, I know that we all seen groceries go up. And so we try again and reusing ingredients, right? And if it's just you, Lisa, if it's just you and 2 younger kids, you don't need 5 different meals every week. You can cook 3 times because most recipes, like my recipes are 4 to 6 servings, so that if it's a larger serving, I tell you at the beginning, take out this amount. So you're going to use it in another recipe. But so you can just cook 3 times and rotate how and when you eat the food. So you're cooking less, you're spending less, and you're still eating homemade meals. Yeah.
Well, I think that's another like that integration. We've talked on the show too about like meatless Mondays, for example, and that can have several benefits. Perhaps, health-wise in terms of consuming, if you're a person that consumes a lot of meat, perhaps health-wise, that would be beneficial. Number 2 is certainly cost. So eating meatless meals can generally be cost savings. And then the third thing I think goes again back to that sort of decision fatigue where, if I just say on Mondays, it's meatless Mondays, well, I don't have to think like, and maybe I have 2, 3 various things I do on Meatless Monday. I don't have to every night be like, well, what am I going to do today? So I love that too. It's like sort of those little tricks that can have several benefits and give you a good bang for your buck, literally and figuratively. Okay, so the last question is from Natalia. I am a mom of 2 girls, ages 8 and 10. I'd like to improve our eating habits, but both of my girls are very picky eaters. I feel like I've tried everything over the years to try to get them to eat more things, but at this point, feel like we eat the same things every week because it's easier than making 2 or more meals every evening, and it saves me from arguing with them. What can I do?
So, Natalia, this is a really common problem that I hear and see, and I have several solutions for you. I think a lot of times we stick to eating the same foods out of the fear, or we already anticipate that our kids are not going to eat something. And but we want to eat something different because we as adults, we're like, I'm so tired of eating the same foods, right? And so, going back to something I shared earlier is you can introduce a new recipe into that rotation by making sure that there is one element, maybe it could only be the rice, or it could be the chicken, or it could be something that every person will eat, right? So it's not about eating the entire recipe as is or as it's shown, but it's making sure that there's one element that each of your kids will eat. And you still go like, you know what? I ate something different today, right? Yep. And so that's really important to understand, that the fact that you're just making the meal, you did your job right there. That's where your response. This is again the responsibility.
Division of responsibility. Yeah.
Yes, you made it. It was nutritious, right? And so, but like my mom, that she did everything cold. She quit making same foods cold turkey, right? And now all of a sudden everything was different. Everything was sprouted this and whatever. And I rebelled. I tell parents, if picky eating is something that you're struggling with, make sure that in your meal rotation, you include foods that your kids or your girls already enjoy eating, but you're adding new things that have an element that they'll eat. So they're getting exposed to new things, whether they eat it or not.
Yep.
Again, that's their responsibility to make that decision, right? Just like we do. We want them to try it, but there's no pressure on making them try it. It's just, this is the food that we made and that I made today, and this is what we're going to eat. And you don't want it? Well, what is it? I don't want it. Okay, they're saying they don't want the whole meal, but if offered as, is there something as shown that you will eat, then maybe it's just rice. And you just have to be okay with that one meal not being as substantial as your expectations, right? We have these huge expectations for our kids, and just letting go of that is really freeing, because we put less pressure on our kids to perform, to eat, to clear their plate. It's like there's so much pressure at the table, right? And at the end of the day, the best way, that's why we're so surprised when our kids try something new at a birthday party and we're like, what? They don't eat that at home.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, that's because there was no pressure to try it. And their friend, they saw their friend try it and their friend liked it. And they're like, wait, I wonder if I'm going to try it too. Right.
Totally.
So again, it's about just incorporating new things that you may want to try that have an element that your girls will eat all the time. Right.
Yeah.
And I also tell people, like, for example, I have a lot of parents that use our classic meal plan to have that done for you plan that does, I already think through this very thing I just told you, Natalia, of how do I reintroduce foods in a rotation. When I have a master plan, I'm looking at it with big picture for like months ahead. So I'm going to make sure that I reintroduce ingredients for our families in different ways, right? And so parents are like, I don't know, this momables lady, this is what she put out and I'm making it. So they totally take away it's my fault. And it's, oh, Laura, she made this plan for us and I followed it. If we don't I've had little people send me on Instagram videos of their kid going, Miss Laura, please don't include the stir fry with the green circle peas. I really don't like it. And because they'll literally, I tell parents put it on me, tell them Miss Laura made this. And so again, that eliminates that feeling of I'm not doing a good job or I failed to plan something, as opposed to hey, we outsourced it. It's like you go to a restaurant, it's a hit or miss sometimes when you try something from the menu. That's how I put it. So again, make sure that, back to her original question, is the summary is make sure that there's an element in a new recipe that the girls will eat, and then do incorporate maybe healthier options of their favorites, right? If you're buying nuggets, maybe get them, they're 8 and 10. They can help you bread the chicken. They can help assembly line, right? Watch my YouTube video on how to make chicken strips or chicken nuggets.
Yep.
And they can help you make them. And then you can have them ready in the freezer. But now they're invested in the process, you see? So I do find that it's a really useful, it's a useful thing to get our kids to prep our food. Because if that's the foods they want to eat, then they're going to have to help you make it and put it together and have it ready in the freezer.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think I agree with everything that you're saying. I think that division of responsibility, if people aren't familiar with it, and we have talked about it, but I totally encourage people to kind of look that up and get familiar with it. I think it can be a little difficult at first, but it's actually quite freeing when if you're a person that's kind of been in these sort of power struggles or arguments or stressful situations at the table, and you just say, I'm just not going to do that anymore, basically, which at first I think is a little anxiety provoking, but after a while it's just kind of freeing. Like when you realize I don't have to really be upset about how much or how little my child is eating. It just is what it is. And at first that's scary, and then after a while you're like, ugh, it's fine, and it feels better for them and for you.
I'm making good choices. I'm buying healthy foods. I'm making them available. I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to be doing.
Yep.
Whether they choose to eat my options and the choices that we have at home or not, is not my fault or not my doing.
And actually, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. I mean, you know what I mean? We're allowing them to, and to listen to their body. Like we decide, you know, instead of saying like, I think you should be so hungry to eat this much food, you know, like let them make that decision. That, and then kind of, I loved what you said about making it an idea of not a complete overhaul. I think that can be kind of a recipe for disaster, and not necessarily a matter of taking away or restricting their favorite foods, but saying, hey, we're going to add something good into the rotation. And just this idea that like, I think that we talk a lot about like exposures for little kids, like, oh, a child has to try something, you know, 15 plus times. And most of us think of that as something we're talking about feeding toddlers. But the truth is that's true for older kids and even adults. So even if they're not eating that kind of new element that you've introduced the first 10, 20 times, don't forget that that exposure is actually still beneficial and important for them, and makes it much more likely that in the future, even if it's far in the future, they will try and probably enjoy those new foods too. So perfect. Well, thank you so much, Laura. This was wonderful. Again, I encourage everybody to look at your resources. I think it's a great tool for families looking to go into the new year with some positive changes. And it's just been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Thank you so much for having me, Kristin. I'm super excited to, you know, speak with someone who also understands, you know, the challenges of feeding families, who has an audience, who is wanting to make better changes and, you know, work on meal times, which we all know is super important. So I'm just delighted to have had the opportunity.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for tuning in for another episode of Feeding the Family. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button and make sure you join us every week for new episodes on Mondays.